Good morning and welcome to this drawing workshop with Hannelore Smith. My name is Anne Cernak and I'm the Senior Development Officer here at Clare. I'm really pleased and delighted to introduce Hannelore to you this morning. She's a wonderful artist who will be leading our workshop. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. Thank you for guiding us through the workshop. Over to you.
Thank you. I've put a note up that parents, it'd be great if you could hide away the objects that you may be responding to. So I think you should have a shell or a pine cone, put them in a bag, hide them in a box, put them under a tea towel, just so the children kind of forget what they look like a little bit. So I'm going to move forward. Hopefully you've got the following materials. Don't worry if you haven't got all of them, but we'll get by with what you've got. And we're making work, we're thinking about touch today, and it's a sort of workshop in response to the exhibition that is happening at the Fitzwilliam at the moment until the 1st of August. And it's all about the human touch, the hand. And the exhibition explores works of art spanning 4,000 years from all over the globe. And it's all about the touch, in the role of touch in the human experience, and how we can sort of look at how touch kind of affects our life. So the curators have collected objects together that explore things related to hand and touch, including the anatomy and skin and the relationship between the brain and the hand and being creative. So we're going to kind of have a workshop as a sort of spin-off to these ideas. And it's quite timely to think about touch, given that touch has become a bit dangerous in the past year with the pandemic. We've been told not to touch, been advised to clean our hands after we've touched. So today, hopefully we're going to reclaim touch for something fun and creative. So I wanted to relate to this idea of the anatomy of touch. And I just wanted to show you a couple of the things, objects at the Fitzwilliam Museum. So this is an anatomical model of a hand. And it shows how our hand's made up, and it's got lots of, it shows the skin and the muscles underneath. And it would have been used for teaching medical students in the 1800s when it was made. And our skin's really sensitive to what we come into contact with. We've got all these tiny receptors and nerves, and these receptors are all over our body, and they allow us to feel. And this model shows that. But there are more receptors in our hands and face than anywhere else. And our hands are like a second pair of eyes, and we're going to be using our hands as a second pair of eyes today. And they help us to provide a picture in our brain of what we're feeling. So that's the first object. The second object is, it's really hard to see because actually it's all embossed, and it's by an artist called Jane Dixon. And she did this series of embossings of Braille. So Braille is like a language that people that are partially sighted or blind, they feel the text, and it's made up of a series of dots. So this is a close-up, and this is all about hidden cities, based on an Italian writer. And what's interesting is she's translated these dots, this Braille, but then she puts it behind glass, so we can't actually feel or read or touch the text. So it kind of links into this this idea of the pandemic and not being allowed to touch. Okay, so our aims today are to use our sense of touch to describe an object, to describe the surface of an object through mark making, and to create an artwork of our organic object. And we're going to, hopefully, if there's time, we're going to use wax resist, frottage and collage. So first thing to do is just remind ourselves of what marks we can make. So what I'd like you to do is think about using your felt tip pen or a biro or a pencil, whatever you've got in front of you. And I have got, and I'll just stop my share, I have got a piece of paper. I've put some circles on it, but it's not important that you have circles. And I want you to, in each sort of area, maybe split your page sort of visually into maybe 9. And I want you to think about how many different marks you can make in each area. So I'm going to make dots. So think about clusters of the same mark. Okay, and this is going to help us with the next activity. So I want you to kind of develop a library of different marks. So I'm dotting. in my first space. I mean, you might want to put some of your marks close together and far apart. Look a bit like that. There's a term for it called pointillism. Okay. And then I'm going to move on and I'm going to do a series of lines. So each of these collections of marks might suggest a texture. Oh, nearly knocked my water over, or a surface. I'm going to do straight lines, but I'm going to put them differently this time. I'm going to make them cross over. So we're being pretty quick with this. Okay. And what else have I got? Squiggly lines. So lines again, but let's make them wibbly wobbly. And you don't have to do my marks. You can be thinking, you might have other ideas. What else have I got? Just a scribble. That's quite an exciting and very quick. Looks like Mr. Messy, if you read the Mr. Men books. What else? What about a series of circles? Reminds me a bit of bubbles. So, and let's do 3 more. How about a series of dashes? And how you make those dashes go also sort of suggests a texture. Mine are kind of going in a bit of a wibbly line. There we go. What other ones? Oh, a spiral. It's a nice quick one. And then finally, my last one is going to be, I don't know what to call these, a series of little curvy dashes, I suppose, U's or N's, depending on which way up you're looking. So by now you should have a collection of different marks that we're going to maybe be able to take some of these marks in the next activity. Okay, so hopefully you've now got a library of textural marks. Now, the next thing I want you to do is I would like you to take your objects. So parents, you can hand over the objects, but I want you to not look at them. So maybe just hold it in your lap and don't look down. And I'd like you to think about what your object feels like. Is it prickly, bobbly? Is it scratchy? Is it ribbed? Is it rough, ridged, curvy, wobbly, hard? Maybe there's another describing word. You could say the words out loud if you like. And what I'd like you to do is think about the collection of marks that we've just made on the paper. And I wonder whether any of those would be the right mark to describe your object. So I've got an object in front of me, hidden away, I should say. And what I'm going to do now is going to have my library of marks in front of me, and I'm going to use a pencil this time, and I'm going to really run my fingers along my object. And my object is it's ridged and it's got a series of little lines. So you may want to use more than one mark. Mine's kind of a bit rough, and it's made rough by these series of different lines that I'm drawing, but they're in a kind of a line. I wonder if you can guess what my object is. Okay. It's interesting, isn't it? Because your fingers kind of magnify what you can feel. So although my object's really small, when I feel it, when I rub it with my fingers, my brain kind of sees it much, much bigger than it is. And I find that really interesting when we're thinking about touch. Okay, so let's go to the next. How do I stop my share? Ooh. Here we go. So I've got a shell, and I could feel on my shell all those kind of ridges. So that's how I drew my shell. I wonder what your objects were, Nancy, or any of the grown-ups here, Anne or Claire. Would you did you have an object in front of you? It'd be great to for you to show us your marks, if you don't mind.
Yes, mine are kind of similar to yours.
Oh, what was your object,
Similar
Anne?
object.
Oh, teeny tiny shell. Excellent.
It was ridged but also curved.
Fantastic.
Underside.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've kind of thought about how it feels. We've maybe come up with some describing words of how we describe it. So what we're going to do next is we're going to just look at the object and just do some drawings, you know, with it in front of us, bearing in mind what we've learned by just feeling it. So what I'd like you to do next is I'd like you to just draw an outline of your object. So I've got quite a nice shape, and actually it's quite a symmetrical shape, fairly. So I'm going to do a outline, just a line drawing of the shape of my object. Okay. Sometimes it's quite nice to do this without taking your pen or pencil off the paper. Oh, I need to move my object so it's out of the way. So can I? And don't worry if it's not perfect, because actually drawing isn't about creating a perfect representation of what your object is. Drawing's about your response to it. And I might now add some of the lines of the sort of internal ridges that I could feel. So there's big ridges going one way, and then there's little ridges that go across. So I'm going to just do this line drawing. Ooh, I got stuck on there's something underneath my paper on the table. All right. It's quite nice to do a continual line drawing because it really makes you slow down and think about the direction that your pencil's going to go. But you can pick your pencil up, it's okay. I want to go around the edge, and there's a bit more of a kind of frilly edge to mine. See, my drawing's not perfect, but I've got the most of the important information about it. So I've done a drawing of the kind of the basic shape of it, and I could now kind of add some of these finer ridges in there. But because there's kind of ridges that it undulates my shell, and yours will be the same, Anne, won't it? There'll be sort of like peaks and troughs, ridges and valleys, I would say. But you could start to, maybe on part of your drawing, start to maybe add a bit more detail and think about those marks that are going to tell us what that shell really feels like. Or if you've got a different object, it might be a pine cone or another natural thing, maybe a one of those conker shells. So I'm going to just add some of the detail. Okay. And you could keep going on this, but I'm going to stop after this line of this sort of ridge of my shell. Okay, so what I'd like us to do next, and I'm going to share my screen again, is I would like us to really zoom in to the surface and turn on our magnifying eyes and draw the sort of surface of the object. So I've got some close-ups of some objects here. I wonder if you can guess what they are. And you could, if you even have a phone that you could use that phone and kind of actually hold your phone and zoom in and magnify and really look at the surface. And if I hold my, which way, hold it up to the camera, I'd like you to forget in this next activity about the shape of the outside of the object and just worry about what's happening in this close-up area of your object. So these were my objects that I was looking at. So I've got a starfish, a shell, and a pine cone, and another sort of scallop shell. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a go at translating them through a technique called wax resist. Okay, so what you're going to need next is you're going to need your wax crayons. Hopefully you've got them. And you are going to need your watercolors. If you haven't got wax crayons, if you've got a candle handy, this can we can do the wax resist. If not, we'll just, don't worry, and we'll just use mark making with our pencil crayons. Okay, so one of the above would be great. So what we're going to do, let me stop my share. Have your object in front of you. So I'm getting my, is it a scallop shell? I'm not quite sure. And I'm going to use that mark making again. And I'm going to choose a light coloured wax crayon. Okay, so I'm going to choose, what shall I go for? I'm going to, this is a nice, this is called periwinkle. What a nice, that feels like it's very relevant to a shell, doesn't it? And I'm going to think about those marks of my shell. I'm not worrying again, I'm not drawing the outside, I'm just really looking closely at the surface and remembering that I want to kind of tell about the story of the fact that it's ridged and it's got these kind of undulating lines in it.
If we're using a candle, should we use that instead?
Yeah, if you can use the corner. So I've got a candle here. We're going to use the candle as well for a frottage activity, but I've got a tea light. You could try just, and if you, it's a bit tricky because it's a bit like magic drawing when you use a clear candle, but try and use the candle to create some lines. Maybe you could have two pieces of paper and you could do one where you're using a coloured pencil and one that you're using the candle to draw with. And what's going to happen, we're using a technique and it's called wax resist. And what happens is when you put a watercolour over the top of your wax crayon, the watercolour can't soak into the paper because the wax has made a sort of a barrier to the watercolour. So it's a really nice technique and there's lots of artists that use it. If you quite like it, you could look up the artist John Piper, and he does some amazing paintings of buildings, but he uses wax to resist. He's a sort of wartime artist. Did lots of kind of cathedrals and churches. But he's a nice one to look at for the technique. And I think Matisse as well did some wax resist sort of drawings for textile designs. I think I've remembered that right. Okay. So I've gone for this lovely named periwinkle, which is a sort of light purpley colour. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to choose a darker colour to go over the top. So I'm going to go for, I've got a dark blue in my palette of paint. If you don't have a wax crayon or a candle, then you could just try and use the paint to create your marks. But if you can see what's happening, as I put my paint over the top, my periwinkle crayon is showing through. And you can think about using your paintbrush. Oh, I've picked up a bit of green. That's quite nice. Let's do that again. You can think about using your paintbrush and the stroke that you're making with your brush. So I'm trying to make my stroke go in the opposite direction, because remember, my ridges on my shell kind of, I've got the big ridges and then I've got the little tiny ribbed bits. So I want them to kind of work together. So I'm starting to get a real sense of what my shell feels like. Okay. And if you've got a palette with lots of colours, you could even start to kind of add some more detail. And you'll notice I haven't worried about making my shell, my paint colour the same as my shell. I've gone a bit abstract, just chosen colours I quite like. I could even add more lines going this way. So you can use your paint, you can use the wax crayon to sort of create this textural painted surface, shall we say. How are you going, Anne?
Okay.
It's going well.
I don't know if you can see it's lighter than yours.
Oh, it's lovely though. Let's see. Oh, super. Really nice and subtle, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And it's not, I think you've used more than one color, it feels like there. So you're kind of bleeding. You're using the watercolor with the water, and then you can bleed colors into one another, which is really nice. So what we're going to do, without wanting to rush on, but I will, if you've finished those, we're going to put that to one side, just allow it to dry. And then we're going to do another activity, which is called frottage. And frottage is basically making a rubbing. But hopefully you have got in front of you a pair of scissors and a piece of thin card. If you've not got thin card, another piece of paper will work just the same. So I am going to show you actually some. So what I've got, excuse me, is I've got a piece of card that I've been cutting shapes out of or tearing shapes out of, depending on what my objects were. So I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to show you some ways that I've done this, how I've approached it. So with the frottage rubbing, it's a case of, let me make that a bit bigger. Oh, hang on. Can you all see that? Okay, nice and big. Brilliant. So with frottage rubbing, it's a case of cutting or tearing shapes that will suggest the texture. So you can look back at that initial drawing that you did of the mark making, and you can look at the watercolor study that you've just done and think about if you were going to make a series of paper cutouts, what would be the most appropriate. So you could use a hole punch like I've done for this one. So this one was looking at the surface of my my starfish. So I cut a series of big holes, big circles and little circles, and a hole punch is brilliant for emptying and using to create a kind of dotty texture. And then I cut some circle shapes out of that one. Then I've got, that's gone, there we go. I was thinking about my ridged shell again, but I kind of cut some angular shapes so that they splayed out like my my shell does, where it sort of splays out in this fan shape. And on my pine cone felt like it needed to be a bit more of a torn line. So I was focusing on the shapes of those, I don't know what they're called. Are they spines? I don't know. But these shapes of the sort of edges of the little bits that splay out. I should know the technical term. And I just did that by sort of tearing little pieces of paper that kind of mimic that sort of, they're a bit curved and some of them are a little bit triangular. Okay, so I would like you to spend a minute thinking about whether you're going to make torn shapes or whether you're going to make cut shapes, depending on your object. Think about the feel of it. Does it need to be quite sharp edges, or a torn edge is more appropriate? And I'd like you to cut out of your piece of card or another piece of paper a series of shapes that suggest the sort of the pattern and texture of your object. So I'm going to let you do that for a minute or two. And what am I going to do? I'm going to find, and then we're going to use those to make rubbings from. So I think I'd quite like to use my ziggity zaggedy lines that I did. I've got some more here actually. I've cheated because obviously I'm a step ahead of you and I don't need to cut mine out because they're pre-cut. So I've got a series of these little yellow pieces, but I might cut them a bit thinner. Maybe start to kind of think about how I can suggest the ridges. Some of them I think are a bit too fat. And this technique of frottage is really great. And we're making a surface by cutting pieces of paper, but you can also go around your house and find different textures to make rubbings from. So I'll show you the rubbing technique in a minute. But things like wooden surfaces, I've got some really kind of gnarled floorboards in my workshop here. And if I make a rubbing of them, I get lots of interesting lines and marks from those wooden floorboards. Things like colanders and sieves can give you nice dots. What else? If any of you've got pets at home and you've got a rabbit hutch or something like that, that's got quite a nice, interesting crisscrossy surface. So you can find, as long as you can put a piece of paper over it and sort of and rub over the top, you can collect marks. And it's another really lovely way of sort of creating an interesting surface that you can sort of cut and collage with. So I've really zoomed into just one of my ridges here. Okay, and what you're going to do when you've done that is in fact, what I want to do is make the short bits this side. Let's bring these this way. You can lay them up. And if you've got a piece of masking tape, it might be handy to have this. I might just let it go as it wants to. Okay, so I've put my shapes on my piece of paper, and then I'm going to put another piece of paper on top, and I'm going to tape it down so it doesn't move. So just put a piece of masking tape in the corners, or hold it with one hand, or if you've got a paperweight, pop a paperweight somewhere on the corner. And then I'm going to take a coloured pencil. I'm going to go for a purple. And I'm going to use the side of my coloured pencil. And you could also try this with your wax crayons if you've not got coloured pencils. Coloured pencils are quite nice, but you can rub and you pick up the edges of those pieces of card underneath, which look sort of hopefully a bit ribby. for what I'm doing. And then what I'm going to do, so I've done it in one colour, and then I'm going to peel up my masking tape and I'm going to shift it slightly. So trying, doesn't matter really if I do move them too much, but trying to sort of keep those pieces roughly in the same space. I'm going to just move it across a little bit and choose a different colour. So I'm going to go with my blue pencil crayon, and I'm going to rub again, and then I get a kind of nice layered texture. Oh, breaking my pencil. And I could keep going, I could keep layering up. Obviously, probably the best thing to do is start with a lighter colour and then choose a colour that's darker to go on the next layer so that you can, it will show over the top. But you can see, here's some of my frottages. So that was based on my zigzag. This was based on my my little sort of starfish legs and the knobbles on those. And this one was based on my pine cone. And how you make your mark, or kind of make the marks with your pencil, like I did quite a scribbly one for this one and sort of scribbled round to kind of almost, you know, hopefully suggest some of the shape of the pine cone. So you can play with the pencil mark as well, and you could even you know, think about some of those other ridges. I could start doing some things going across and add more marks. So you're really starting to build up a series of textures. And I'm sort of trying to, through my mark making and using this frottage, I'm trying to get a sense of what the surface of that object feels like if I was zooming into it. Okay. And then the final thing to do with this frottage exercise is, if you've got your candle, lay a new piece of paper on top, and you can rub your candle, the side of the candle. It helps if the candle isn't a coloured candle, and if it's just a white one. Birthday candles are quite nice, you know, the little white birthday candles are quite nice to use as sort of more of a pencil and draw with. So it's quite fun. It's a bit exciting drawing with a candle, because it is like those secret messages. I've lost my pot of, here we go, my pot of water. There we are. So I'm gonna then reveal my hidden textural message. So there's two techniques, one using your pencil crayons or your wax crayons, and then the other one using the wax crayon. And the nice thing about this sort of layering up method is I can leave that, I can let it dry, and then I can come back to it and do another layer. So let's find one I did earlier. So I can keep adding. So here, where is it? Find the one I'm looking for. Go with this one. So here's one where I don't know if you might not be able to see it, but I've done my first layer of wax. Then I've added some wax crayon marks, and now in a slightly darker color, I'm going to go over the top again. Let's go for this dark blue. And I can start to add another sort of darker layer, and it builds. Every so often I pick up a green I wasn't intending. I can't quite work out where it's from, but anyway, it's quite nice. So then I've got a sort of more layered textural sort of zoom in close up of my my shell, and I'm gonna go back in. So on this PDF will be shared so you can look at all the different activities. So for the final thing that we're going to do, it would be really nice to create and bring the outline of your object back in. So you can see here, am I sharing actually? I don't know if I am. Hold on. Let me go.
No, we can't see.
You can't see what I can see. Let me share my screen again. Okay, let's do that. There we go. So for the final activity, it goes right back to the beginning when I want to reshare. Let's go. Here we go. It would be really good, and we might not be able to do it right now because your wax resists might be a bit wet, or your frottage studies. But what I'd like you to do is bring that outline shape back in. So you can see in my image that I've kind of drawn round and I've produced, if I can find him, a sort of a outline of my sort of scalloped shaped shell that I've got. And I'm going to do the same here. It's a little bit wet, but hopefully I can still draw. So, and then I can work into it again with pencil crayons and things like that. So my shape goes something like this. And if I'd have spent more time, I might have covered more of my paper, and then I'd have been able to have a slightly bigger shell, but never mind. So I'm going to hope that it's not too wet to cut it out. So I've got my outline. And then I can cut it out, and I do want to try and get some of these ridged, sort of the ridged frilly edges. In fact, if I stop share, that might be more helpful because you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to try and wiggle my scissors to get those ridged edges that are on my the edge of this shell that are created as it grows. We picked up loads of these lovely shells when we were on a holiday in France. You don't sort of see them so much where I'm from. Don't see many shells on. I live by the seaside, but it's not a shelly beach, should we say. Lots of crabs, not many shells. Okay. So I've got my sort of background texture. Let's take this out of the way. Still stuck to the table. And then I could use pencil crayons or even felt pens to start to add and draw in sort of some of the extra detail. And I kind of need something that is maybe a bit darker, but we'll go with this. So I can start to think about adding some of those lines and the detail. And then you could use frottage and that rubbing method to create a pattern on the back on a background paper. So maybe that's your opportunity to take a piece of paper around your house and see what surfaces that you can gather. And I made a kind of a liney background version. So this is one I did a little while ago. And you can then have a kind of an alternate pattern, something that contrasts with your object on your background paper, or you might have pattern paper at home. So this needs a bit more work, and eventually it will hopefully end up something a bit more like that, where I used a pen, I think, on this one, a fine line pen, just to add more detail. But you can see that I used the frottage in the background with the candle, and then I added wax crayons. There's all sorts going on here to suggest the texture of my shell. So I think that brings us to the end of the session. If you enjoyed it, then you can find us on at Art Pocket, where we do lots of courses and workshops online and in Norwich. So do come and visit us. And let me escape my, there we go. And I hope you enjoy sort of exploring the textures of objects and using your sort of binocular eyes to really zoom in and think about the surface and think about how you can translate the things that you're touching into something more visual. So what you feel in your hands and what you feel in your fingertips, how you can use marks in your drawing to show us that visually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful workshop. I'll show you my shell.
Yeah, let's have a look.
Get as far as you.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well done, Anne.
And I really enjoyed the frottage as well, which
it's such a nice technique, isn't it?
Yeah, it was easier on this paper than this one, but
that's a good point, actually. I should have said, yeah, frottage, a thinner paper. So drawing paper is really good when you're doing watercolor, and it works quite well with a wax candle. But actually, when you really want to get the texture of something, thinner paper works really well. And if you could, you know, tissue papers and things, if you can manage to do it really gently, that can be lovely.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So thank you so much, Hannelore.
Thank you.
We hope that everyone watching enjoys this workshop, and please do feel free to share it with your friends and anyone you think might have fun participating as well.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.